The coffee mug was gone. After 17 years of arriving at Meridian Defense Solutions at exactly 7:15 a.m., after 17 years of finding my faded company-branded mug, the one with the hairline crack down the left side, sitting exactly where I'd left it the night before, it wasn't there. I'm Lionel Morrow, but everyone calls me Leo. 52 years old, lead compliance analyst, and apparently, as of this morning, completely disposable. The open plan office buzzed with an unusual energy. Clusters of employees huddled around desks, whispering in voices that died the moment I walked past. Sarah from accounting looked up, caught my eye, then quickly looked away. Tom from procurement was suddenly very interested in his computer screen. Something was wrong. My cubicle, the same corner spot I'd occupied for over a decade, looked different. The rolling chair I'd grown comfortable with, the one with the slight squeak in the left wheel that I'd learned to live with, had been replaced with a cheap plastic thing that looked like it came from a discount office supply store. I sat down carefully. The new chair didn't adjust properly. "Leo!" The voice boomed across the office. Griffin Voss, our new chief operating officer, strode toward me with the kind of confident swagger that comes from an MBA and zero understanding of what actually keeps a defense contractor running. At 38, he was younger than my son Jonah, who worked in our IT department. Griffin had been hired 6 weeks ago with a mandate to modernize operations and eliminate redundancies. The board loved him. He spoke their language: efficiency metrics, streamlined processes, cost optimization, all the buzzwords that made shareholders happy and employees nervous. "Morning, Griffin," I said, standing up. The cheap chair rolled backward and hit my desk with a plastic thunk. "We need to talk. Conference room. 5 minutes." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished concrete floor. I glanced at my computer screen. 17 unread emails, including 3 from Sienna Liu, our main contact at Blackwater Defense Contracting. The subject lines made my stomach tighten. Urgent, process change clarification, error reconciliation timeline, and priority, contract compliance question. The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and fresh paint. Griffin sat at the head of the long table, his laptop open, fingers dancing across the keyboard. Carla Fenwick, our head of finance, sat to his right, her sharp eyes fixed on a tablet. She was 44, brilliant, and had always been polite but distant with me. "Sit," Griffin said without looking up. I took a seat halfway down the table. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Griffin finally closed his laptop and looked at me. "Leo, I've been reviewing your role here, your compliance oversight responsibilities." He leaned back in his chair. "I have to be honest. A lot of what you do seems redundant." The word hit me like a physical blow. Redundant? The vendor error reconciliation, the manual contract reviews, the legacy documentation protocols, it's all very thorough, but frankly, it's outdated. We have automated systems now. We have streamlined processes. Carla spoke for the first time. "We're not questioning your dedication, Leo, but we need to be realistic about resource allocation." "Resource allocation," I repeated slowly. "Is that what I am now?" Griffin's smile was patronizing. "Look, we're not eliminating your position. We're refocusing it. I want you to concentrate on legacy documentation, historical compliance records, that kind of thing." "And the vendor oversight?" We're streamlining that process. Carla will be taking over the financial reconciliation aspects, and I'll handle vendor relations directly." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Griffin, with respect, vendor error reconciliation isn't just about finance. These are defense contracts. There are regulatory requirements, safety protocols, audit trails that can be automated," Griffin interrupted. "Leo, I appreciate your institutional knowledge, but we need to move into the 21st century here." Carla slid a folder across the table. "These are your new responsibilities. Take some time to review them." I opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of tasks that could generously be described as busy work: archive organization, historical document digitization, legacy system maintenance. "This is," I started, then stopped. What was the point? "Is there a problem?" Griffin asked. "No," I said quietly. "No problem." "Great. Oh, and Leo, we'll need your admin credentials for the vendor oversight system. Security protocols, you understand?" I stared at him. "My admin credentials. Just a formality. Carla will walk you through the transition." 20 minutes later, I sat in my cubicle staring at a computer screen that no longer recognized my access level. 17 years of carefully maintained vendor relationships, compliance protocols, and error-catching systems, gone with a few keystrokes. My phone buzzed. A text from Jonah. Dad, heard about the meeting. You okay? Before I could respond, another buzz. This time from Sienna Liu. Leo, I tried calling but got voicemail. We have a situation with the Q3 reconciliation. Several errors in the latest batch that need immediate review. Can you call me? I tried to log into the vendor oversight system. Access denied. I tried the backup portal. Access denied. I tried the legacy system I'd helped design 15 years ago. Access denied. Problem? Carla appeared beside my desk like a shark sensing blood in the water. I can't access any of the vendor systems. That's correct. As Griffin mentioned, we're streamlining the process. She handed me a manila envelope. These are your new login credentials. They'll give you access to the archive systems and historical databases. I opened the envelope. Inside was a temporary password and a login that ended with legacy. Carla, Sienna Liu is trying to reach me about errors in the Q3 reconciliation. If I can't access the oversight system, I'll handle it, she said smoothly. That's part of the new structure. But you don't know the vendor protocols. The error classification system alone has 17 different categories, and each one has specific regulatory requirements. Leo, her voice was sharp. The decision has been made. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the floor in the same confident rhythm as Griffin's shoes. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sienna. Leo, this is urgent. Found discrepancies in invoice batch 247C. Looks like a transposition error, but need to verify against the master contract. Standard protocol says you need to sign off before we can process corrections. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I no longer have system access. Contact Carla Fenwick in finance. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, what do you mean you don't have access? I didn't know how to answer that. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of meaningless tasks. I organized files that didn't need organizing. I reviewed historical documents that no one would ever read. I watched my colleagues avoid eye contact and felt the weight of 17 years of expertise being flushed down the drain. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room with a sandwich I couldn't taste. The TV was tuned to a news channel, but I wasn't really watching. My mind kept circling back to Sienna's text about the transposition error. In my experience, those seemingly small mistakes had a way of snowballing into major problems. Dad? I looked up. Jonah stood in the doorway, his young face creased with worry. At 25, he had my height, but his mother's dark hair and sharp intelligence. He'd started in IT 6 months ago, fresh out of college with a computer science degree and enough energy to power a small city. Hey, son. He sat down across from me. I heard what happened. The whole office is talking about it. What are they saying? That Griffin is cleaning house. That anyone over 50 better start updating their resumes? Jonah's voice dropped. Dad, this isn't right. You know more about vendor compliance than anyone in the company. I managed a weak smile. Apparently that knowledge is redundant. It's not redundant. It's essential. Just last month you caught that error in the Blackwater contract that would have cost us... Jonah. I put my hand on his arm. Don't. Please. I need you to focus on your own career. Don't get caught up in my problems. He was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to do my job, whatever that is now. But even as I said it, I felt something shifting inside me, a quiet anger that I'd been suppressing all morning. Griffin wanted to modernize? Fine. Carla wanted to streamline? Perfect. They could handle the vendor oversight themselves. And when the inevitable problems arose, because they always did in defense contracting, they'd learn exactly why my redundant expertise had been keeping this company out of trouble for 17 years. I just hoped they learned before it was too late. The anonymous text came at 11:47 p.m. They're moving files tonight. I stared at my phone screen, lying in bed next to my wife Margaret, who was fast asleep. The number wasn't in my contacts. Area code 703, local. I slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, my mind racing. Who would text me at midnight, and what files? My laptop was still open on the kitchen table from earlier when I'd been trying to make sense of my new legacy documentation responsibilities. On impulse, I opened the VPN client I'd used for years to access company systems remotely. My main credentials didn't work, of course, but there was another login, one I'd set up years ago for emergency access during a system migration. It was tied to an old project code that had been forgotten in the bureaucratic shuffle. I held my breath and tried it. It worked. The old interface looked exactly the same as it had 5 years ago, clunky but functional. More importantly, it gave me read-only access to the vendor oversight system. I navigated to the activity logs, my heart pounding. There it was. A flurry of activity from 10:30 p.m. onward. Process changes, protocol updates, authorization modifications, all signed off with Griffin's digital signature. I scrolled through the changes, my stomach sinking with each entry. Error classification protocols simplified from 17 categories to 5. Vendor notification requirements reduced from 48 hours to 24. Manual review thresholds increased from $1,000 to $10,000. Every single safeguard I'd built over 17 years was being systematically dismantled. But it was the final entry that made me sit back in my chair. Vendor reconciliation auto-approval activated. Manual oversight requirement waived for transactions under $50,000. I'd learned $50,000. In defense contracting, that covered about 80% of our vendor transactions. Griffin had just eliminated human oversight for the vast majority of our vendor payments. I was still staring at the screen when my phone buzzed again. "Did you see?" "Same unknown number." I typed back. "Who is this?" "Someone who cares about this company. Check the parking logs." Parking logs? I navigated to the security system, another forgotten access point from my early days when I'd helped set up the digital infrastructure. The parking garage had badge scanners that logged every entry and exit. I pulled up tonight's data. Griffin's Mercedes had entered at 9:45 p.m., Carla's BMW at 9:52 p.m. But there was something else. A guest pass issued at 10:15 p.m. for the archive level. The archive level was restricted access. Only a handful of people had authorization to issue guest passes for that area. I was one of them, or had been. My phone buzzed a third time. Archive room. Someone's been busy. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, trying to process what I'd discovered. Griffin and Carla weren't just streamlining processes, they were actively dismantling the oversight systems that kept Meridian Defense compliant with federal regulations. The question was, why? The next morning, I arrived at the office early and went straight to Catriona Cat Sawyer's desk. At 58, Cat had been the office manager longer than anyone could remember. She saw everything, knew everyone, and had a network of information that would make the CIA jealous. "Morning, Leo," she said without looking up from her computer. "Heard about your transition." "Cat, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Now she looked up. Her gray eyes were sharp and knowing. "Shoot." "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Changes in protocol, people working late, anything out of the ordinary?" Cat glanced around the office, then leaned closer. "You mean besides our new CO treating this place like his personal kingdom?" "Yeah, besides that." She was quiet for a moment, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Found this in the shred bin yesterday morning. Thought you might find it interesting." I unfolded the paper. It was a financial report showing fund transfers between various internal accounts. The amounts were substantial, hundreds of thousands of dollars moving between operations, contingency, and vendor payment accounts. "Cat, where did this come from?" "Carla's office. She must have printed it by mistake and shredded it when she realized." Cat's voice dropped to a whisper. "Leo, I've been here 23 years. I've never seen fund movements like this without board approval." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "Can I keep this?" "I never gave it to you." "Understood." I was walking back to my cubicle when my phone rang. Sienna Liu. "Leo, thank God. I've been trying to reach Carla all morning about the Q3 reconciliation, but she's not responding to emails or calls." "What's the situation?" "Remember that transposition error I mentioned yesterday? It's bigger than I thought. The invoice shows $47,300, but the contract specifies $43,700. That's a $3,600 discrepancy." I felt a chill. "Sienna, under the old protocols, that would trigger a full manual review." "Exactly. But I got an email this morning saying the new threshold is $10,000. Since this is under that amount, it's supposed to auto-approve." Her voice was strained. "Leo, I know this is an error. I have the original contract right here. But the system is telling me to process it anyway." "Don't process it. I can't hold it indefinitely. My supervisor is asking questions." I closed my eyes. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. "Sienna, give me an hour. Let me see what I can do." But what could I do? I didn't have access to the oversight system. I couldn't authorize corrections. I couldn't even file an official objection. I tried calling Carla, straight to voicemail. I tried calling Griffin. His assistant said he was in meetings all day. Frustrated, I decided to take a more direct approach. I walked to the server room on the pretense of retrieving some old backup files. The server room was one of the few places in the building that still felt like home, racks of humming equipment, blinking lights, the steady whisper of cooling fans. I was surprised to find my old Lucky Charm sitting on top of the backup server, a rare 1943 steel penny that I'd kept on my desk for years. Someone had moved it here, placed it carefully where I'd be sure to see it. Another message? I pocketed the coin and was about to leave when I heard voices in the hallway. Griffin and Carla, talking in low, urgent tones. "Can't keep moving funds around like this," Carla was saying. "The board will notice eventually." "The board won't notice anything if we handle this right," Griffin replied. "The vendor payments are the perfect cover. We process the errors at the higher amounts, pocket the difference, and use the auto-approval system to cover our tracks." My blood went cold. They weren't just dismantling oversight. They were actively defrauding the company. "What about Morrow?" Carla asked. "He knows these systems better than anyone." "Morrow's been neutralized. No access, no authority, no credibility. Even if he figures something out, who's going to believe him? A bitter old employee who got demoted?" Their voices faded as they moved down the hallway, but I'd heard enough. I stood in the server room for a long time, my mind racing. Griffin and Carla were using the vendor payment system to embezzle money from the company. They'd removed me from oversight specifically to eliminate the one person who would catch their scheme. But I had caught it. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? I thought about Sienna's call, about the $3,600 discrepancy that was about to be auto-approved. In the grand scheme of Griffin and Carla's fraud, it was probably insignificant, but it was also evidence. I pulled out my phone and called Sienna back. "It's Leo. Process the payment." "What? But you said—" "I know what I said, but process it. Let the auto-approval go through." There was a long pause. "Leo, I don't understand." "Trust me. And Sienna? Keep detailed records of everything. Every email, every approval, every discrepancy. Everything." "Okay, if you say so." I hung up and walked back to my cubicle, my mind already working on the next steps. Griffin and Carla thought they'd eliminated the threat by removing me from the system. They had no idea they'd just given me the perfect motivation to destroy them. The coffee shop on 5th Street was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, waiting for Priya Desai to arrive. Priya had been Meridian Defense's external legal counsel for 8 years, but our friendship went back much further. We'd met in graduate school. She was getting her law degree while I was finishing my master's in systems compliance. She was brilliant, thorough, and one of the few people I trusted completely. She slid into the booth across from me, her briefcase clicking against the table. At 47, Priya had the kind of sharp intelligence that made opposing lawyers nervous and corporate executives very careful about what they said in her presence. "Leo, you sounded terrible on the phone. What's going on?" I pulled out the folded financial report Kat had given me and slid it across the table. "I think Griffin and Carla are embezzling from the company." Priya's eyebrows went up, but she didn't say anything. She unfolded the paper and studied it carefully, her lawyer's mind already analyzing the implications. "Where did you get this?" Kat found it in Carla's shred bin. "So it's stolen evidence from a trash can?" Priya sighed. "Leo, even if this shows irregularities, it's not admissible. And more importantly, it's not proof of embezzlement. Fund transfers between internal accounts could have legitimate explanations." "I heard them talking, Priya, in the hallway outside the server room. Griffin said they were using vendor payments as cover, processing errors at higher amounts, and pocketing the difference." "You overheard a conversation. Without context, without recording, without witnesses." She leaned forward. "Leo, I understand you're upset about being demoted, but this isn't about being demoted." The words came out sharper than I intended. "This is about 17 years of compliance safeguards being dismantled so 2 criminals can steal from a defense contractor." Priya was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "Okay, let's say you're right. What evidence do you have beyond a shredded financial report and an overheard conversation?" I told her about the late-night system changes, the auto-approval protocols, the vendor oversight elimination. I told her about Sienna's call and the $3,600 discrepancy that was about to be processed without review. "The vendor discrepancies are the key," I said. "They're small enough to fly under the radar individually, but if there's a pattern, you'd need access to the vendor payment records. I have access, limited but functional." Priya's expression sharpened. "Leo, please tell me you're not hacking into company systems." "I'm using legitimate credentials that haven't been properly deactivated. There's a difference?" "Not to a prosecutor, there isn't." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, traffic moved slowly down 5th Street. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that a major defense contractor was being systematically looted by its own executives. Priya, what if I'm right? If you're right, then Griffin and Carla are committing federal crimes against a company with defense contracts. The penalties would be severe: prison time, massive fines, complete destruction of their careers. And if I'm wrong? If you're wrong, you're a disgruntled employee making serious accusations against your superiors based on circumstantial evidence. You'd be fired, possibly prosecuted, and your career would be over. I nodded slowly. So I need more evidence. You need bulletproof evidence. Documentation, records, patterns that can't be explained away. Priya leaned back in her chair. Leo, I have to ask, are you absolutely sure about this? Because once you start down this path, there's no going back. I thought about Griffin's condescending smile when he called my work redundant. I thought about Carla's cold efficiency as she stripped away my access. I thought about 17 years of building systems designed to protect the company, only to watch them be dismantled for personal profit. I'm sure, Priya nodded. Then we need to be smart about this. No more unauthorized system access, no more overheard conversations. If we're going to take down a COO and a finance director, we need evidence that will hold up in court. What do you suggest? Document everything. Every change to protocols, every vendor discrepancy, every suspicious financial movement. Build a timeline. And Leo? She fixed me with a serious look. Don't do anything illegal. We need to be completely above board, or this whole thing falls apart. I left the coffee shop with a mixture of determination and dread. Priya was right. I needed more evidence. But getting that evidence without crossing legal lines would be nearly impossible. My phone buzzed as I walked back to my car. A text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level B2. Now. I hesitated. The anonymous text had been helpful so far, but meeting an unknown contact in an isolated parking garage felt like a bad idea. On the other hand, this person clearly had access to information I needed. Level B2 of the Meridian parking garage was dimly lit and mostly empty. I parked near the elevator and waited, my engine running, ready to leave quickly if necessary. A figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar. Rami Ortega, the night shift security guard. I'd seen him around the building, but had never really talked to him. He was in his early 30s, with the lean build of someone who stayed in shape and the alert eyes of someone who noticed everything. He approached my car cautiously and tapped on the passenger window. I unlocked the doors. Mr. Morrow, I'm Rami. I work security. I figured that out. You've been sending the texts? He nodded. I've been watching what's happening. The late-night meetings, the archive access, the system changes. Something's not right. Why come to me? Because you're the only one who knows enough about the vendor systems to understand what they're doing. Rami pulled out a small notebook. I keep logs of everything. Badge swipes, parking entries, after-hours access. It's not official, just a hobby. Ham radio operator habits, I guess. He flipped through the notebook, showing me pages of handwritten entries. Times, dates, badge numbers, locations. Look at this pattern, he said, pointing to entries from the past 2 weeks. Griffin and Carla accessing the archive room after hours. Always together, always between 10 p.m. and midnight. They've been there 6 times in the last 10 days. What's in the archive room that they'd need? Historical contracts, compliance documentation, audit records, all the stuff that would show how the vendor oversight system was supposed to work. I felt a chill of understanding. They're not just changing the current systems, they're altering the historical records to make it look like the new protocols were always in place. Rami nodded grimly. That's what I think too. But here's the thing, I have video. Video? Security cameras in the archive room. They're not supposed to record, but I've been running a backup system, completely off the books. He handed me a USB drive. Everything's on there. Badge swipes, video footage, timestamps. I stared at the drive. Rami, why are you doing this? Why risk your job? He was quiet for a moment. My dad worked for a defense contractor in San Diego. 23 years, clean record, loyal employee. Then the executives got caught embezzling, and when the company went under, all the employees lost their pensions. Dad included. Rami's voice hardened. I won't let it happen here. I pocketed the USB drive. What do you need from me? Keep investigating, keep documenting, and when you're ready to move, let me know. I have access to systems they don't know about. Rami, if we're caught, if we don't act, they'll destroy this company and everyone who works here. He opened the car door. I'll be in touch. I sat in the parking garage for a long time after he left, turning the USB drive over in my hands. Between Priya's legal expertise and Rami's surveillance evidence, I was starting to build a case. But I needed more. I needed proof of the actual financial crimes, not just the cover-up, and for that, I'd have to take risks that could destroy my career. The question was, how far was I willing to go? My phone rang. Sienna Liu. Leo, we have a problem. That $3,600 discrepancy you told me to process, it auto-approved, just like you said it would. But now I'm getting pressure from my supervisor to expedite 3 more payments with similar errors. How similar? Transposition errors, amount discrepancies, missing documentation, all under the $10,000 threshold, all set to auto-approve. Her voice was strained. Leo, this doesn't feel right. These errors are too convenient, too systematic. Sienna, I need you to do something for me. Can you pull the vendor payment records for the last month? Look for patterns, similar error types, consistent amounts, anything that seems coordinated. I can try, but if anyone finds out I'm digging into this, be careful. And Sienna, keep copies of everything. Off-site, secure, multiple backups. You think this is going to get worse, don't you? I looked at the USB drive in my hand, thought about Griffin and Carla's late-night archive visits, remembered the cold certainty in Griffin's voice when he said I'd been neutralized. Yeah, I said. I think it's going to get a lot worse. Jonah's apartment was a testament to the financial realities of being 25 in today's economy. Small, cramped, but meticulously organized. He'd inherited my need for order, though his version involved color-coded cables and perfectly aligned computer monitors rather than compliance checklists and vendor files. Dad, you're scaring me, he said, closing his laptop after I'd finished explaining everything. If Griffin and Carla are really embezzling and you're investigating them, I know the risks. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to take on 2 people who have already proven they're willing to destroy careers to protect themselves. I sat back in his uncomfortable IKEA chair, feeling every one of my 52 years. Jonah, what would you do? Just let them steal from the company? Let them destroy 17 years of compliance safeguards? I'd be careful, and I'd make sure I had allies. He opened his laptop again, which is why I've been doing some digging of my own. Jonah, I told you not to get involved. Too late. I'm already involved. His fingers flew across the keyboard. You know how IT gets access to everything, right? System logs, user activity, file modifications, email routing, all of it. A window opened on his screen showing what looked like a database interface. This is the email routing log. Look at this pattern. He pointed to a series of entries highlighted in yellow. Every email sent to or from your old vendor oversight account gets automatically forwarded to Carla's personal folder. They've been intercepting your communications for weeks. I felt sick. Including my conversations with Sienna? All of them. But here's the interesting part. They set up the forwarding rule before they officially removed your access. They were planning this. Another window opened. And this is the system modification log. Look at the timestamps. The entries showed a clear pattern. Major changes to vendor protocols, all implemented during off hours, all approved by Griffin without going through the normal review process. Jonah, how are you accessing this information? Carefully. And legally. This is all data I have legitimate access to as part of my job, he paused. Well, mostly legally. Mostly? I may have kept a backup of some logs that were scheduled for deletion. Standard IT practice, really. You never know when you might need historical data for troubleshooting. I studied my son's face. He had his mother's determination when he set his mind to something. What else did you find? The vendor payment system has been modified to allow batch processing without individual review. That's new as of last week. And there's something else, a hidden approval code that bypasses all oversight checks. Hidden how? Embedded in the payment processing software. Someone with admin access could use it to approve any transaction, regardless of amount or error flags. Jonah's expression was grim. Dad, this isn't just about stealing money. They've turned the entire vendor payment system into their personal ATM. My phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. Can we meet? Found something you need to see. I looked at Jonah. I have to go, but son, please be careful. If Griffin and Carla find out you've been digging into this, I'll be careful. But Dad, I'm not backing down. These people are stealing from our company, and that affects everyone who works here. An hour later, I sat in Sienna's car in the parking lot of a strip mall 20 minutes from the office. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect professional appearance slightly disheveled. Leo, I pulled the vendor payment records like you asked. What I found... She handed me a thick folder. It's worse than we thought. I opened the folder to find dozens of payment authorizations, each flagged with handwritten notes in Sienna's careful script. Error patterns, amount discrepancies, missing documentation, all processed through the auto-approval system. Look at the amounts, Sienna said. They're not random. 3,600, 4,200, 5,800, 7,400. Always increments of 400. I studied the numbers. She was right. There was a clear pattern. How many payments? 37 in the last month. Total discrepancy amount, $186,200. Nearly $200,000 in a single month. Sienna, these errors are too systematic to be accidental. I know, and there's something else. She pulled out her phone and showed me an email. This morning, I got instructions to expedite processing for high-priority vendor payments. The email came from Griffin's office, but it was sent to a distribution list I'd never seen before. I read the email. It was brief, professional, and completely outside normal protocol. Who else is on this distribution list? That's the problem. I don't know. The list is marked as confidential, and I don't have access to see the other recipients. A chill ran down my spine. Sienna, they're expanding the operation, bringing in more people. Or they're about to do something big enough that they need to coordinate multiple vendors simultaneously. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over us. Griffin and Carla weren't just stealing money, they were building a systematic fraud operation that could destroy Meridian Defense. Leo, what do? We document everything, every payment, every error, every suspicious communication. I handed her one of my business cards, but wrote my personal cell number on the back. From now on, use this number. Don't email, don't use company phones, they're monitoring everything. I'm scared, Leo. If they find out I've been helping you, they won't. You're doing your job, following procedures, processing payments as instructed. Nothing you've done is suspicious. But even as I said it, I knew we were all taking enormous risks. Griffin and Carla had already proven they were willing to destroy careers to protect their scheme. If they discovered our investigation... My phone rang. Unknown number. Leo, it's Rami. We need to talk. Something happened tonight that you need to know about. What kind of something? The kind that means they know someone's watching them. I felt my stomach drop. Where do you want to meet? Security office. Building's empty except for me. Use the east entrance. I'll disable the badge scanner so there's no record of you being here. I looked at Sienna. I have to go. But keep doing what you're doing. Document everything, trust no one except me, and be ready to move quickly if things go bad. How will I know if things go bad? I thought about Griffin's confident smile, Carla's cold efficiency, and the systematic way they'd dismantled 17 years of safeguards. You'll know. 20 minutes later, I stood in the security office watching Rami replay footage from the archive room. The timestamp showed 11:30 p.m. the previous night, Griffin and Carla working methodically through file boxes, removing documents and replacing them with what looked like photocopies. They're not just altering records, Rami said. They're destroying the originals. Can you tell what documents they're targeting? Compliance protocols, vendor agreements, audit reports, anything that would show how the oversight system was originally designed. Rami fast-forwarded through the footage. But here's the thing that worries me. Look at this. The image showed Carla holding up a document and pointing to something on the page. Griffin nodded and made a note in a small notebook. They're being very systematic about this. Like they have a specific list of documents to find. A list of what? Documents that prove you were right to flag certain vendor payments. Documents that show their new protocols are designed to hide fraud rather than prevent it. I stared at the screen, watching two criminals methodically destroy evidence of their crimes. Rami, how long do you think we have before they finish this? Based on the number of boxes in the archive room, maybe a week, 2 at the outside. Then we need to move fast. Leo, there's something else. After they left the archive room, I followed them on the security cameras. They went to Griffin's office and had what looked like a very intense conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but... Rami switched to a different camera feed. Griffin's office, viewed through the glass wall that separated it from the main workspace. Griffin and Carla sat across from each other, their body language tense and urgent. I'm not a lip reader, but I caught a few words. Investigation, problem, and what looked like your name. My blood went cold. They know. They suspect. But I don't think they know how much we know, or who else is involved. That gives us a small advantage. Maybe. But Leo, if they're willing to destroy evidence and manipulate federal compliance records, what do you think they'll do to the people investigating them? I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. We both knew the answer. Griffin and Carla had already proven they were willing to destroy careers to protect their scheme, If they felt truly threatened, they might be willing to do much worse. The question was, could we gather enough evidence to stop them before they decided we were too dangerous to ignore? Priya's law office occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian house in the historic district, all exposed brick and polished hardwood floors. Her conference room overlooked a small garden where morning sunlight filtered through oak trees, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted with the breeze. It would have been peaceful if we weren't planning to destroy two people's careers. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Priya said, spreading documents across the mahogany table. "We have financial records showing irregular fund transfers, security footage of after-hours document destruction, vendor payment records showing systematic errors, and digital logs proving they dismantled oversight protocols. That's the summary, yes? And all of this evidence was obtained legally?" I hesitated. "Mostly legally." Leo: "The security footage is from cameras that aren't supposed to exist. The digital logs include deleted files that Jonah recovered from system backups. The financial records came from Carla's trash." Priya rubbed her temples. "So we have illegally obtained surveillance footage, potentially unauthorized access to company systems, and stolen documents. Evidence of federal crimes committed by executives at a defense contractor. Evidence that might not be admissible in court?" We stared at each other across the table. Outside, a cardinal landed on the garden fence and began singing, oblivious to the human drama unfolding nearby. "Priya, what if we can make it admissible?" "How?" "What if we can get them to confess?" She leaned back in her chair. "You want to wear a wire?" "I want to confront them with the evidence and record their response. If they admit to the fraud, we have a case. If they don't, you've just warned them that they're under investigation and they'll destroy whatever evidence we haven't found yet. It's a risk. It's a huge risk. Leo, these people have already proven they're willing to destroy careers to protect themselves. If you confront them directly, they'll try to destroy me. I know." Priya was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents spread across the table. "There might be another way." "What do you mean?" "Your original compliance contract with Meridian. Do you remember the specific terms?" "Generally, yes." "Why?" "I'd like to review it. Sometimes these contracts have clauses that give compliance officers special protections or authorities." She opened her laptop and began typing. "I'm accessing the corporate filing database. If your contract was properly registered..." Her fingers stopped moving. "Leo, when was your contract last updated?" 2019, I think. Maybe 2020. "According to this, your current contract includes a provision I've never seen before." Priya's voice was carefully neutral. "Section 12.3. In the event that the lead compliance officer is removed from oversight responsibilities without cause, all process changes implemented during the period of removal are subject to immediate review and potential reversal." What does that mean in practical terms? "It means that if you were removed from vendor oversight without legitimate cause, any changes Griffin and Carla made to the compliance protocols could be legally challenged." Priya looked up from her laptop. "But there's more. Section 12.4. The executive responsible for authorizing the removal of compliance oversight assumes personal liability for any financial losses resulting from inadequate vendor oversight during the period of removal." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Personal liability? If vendor errors or fraud occur after your removal, and those errors could have been prevented by the original oversight protocols, Griffin becomes personally responsible for the financial losses. How personally responsible? Full financial restitution, potential criminal liability if fraud is involved, and immediate termination for cause. Priya's smile was sharp. "Leo, they didn't just remove you from oversight. They created a legal trap for themselves. But only if we can prove that errors occurred because of their changes. Which we can. Sienna's vendor payment records show systematic errors totaling nearly $200,000 in a single month. Under your original protocols, those errors would have been caught and corrected before payment." I stared at the contract language on her screen. "So Griffin signed his own death warrant when he removed me from oversight?" "Assuming we can prove the errors were preventable, yes." "And Carla?" "As head of finance, she's responsible for implementing the new protocols. If we can prove she knew the changes would increase the risk of fraud..." Priya shrugged. "She's an accessory." My phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. "Urgent. Major problem with vendor payments. Need to talk immediately." I showed Priya the message. I think our timeline just accelerated. "Go. But Leo, be careful. If they're getting desperate..." "I know." But as I left Priya's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. Griffin and Carla were smart, experienced executives. They wouldn't have implemented such a risky fraud scheme without some kind of exit strategy. The question was, what were they planning that we hadn't anticipated? I met Sienna at a small restaurant bar downtown, the kind of place where defense contractors and government employees went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. She was already there when I arrived, nursing a glass of wine with shaking hands. "Leo, thank God you're here." She pulled out her phone. "I just got off a conference call with my supervisor and two people I'd never met before. They're demanding immediate processing of a batch payment totaling $4.2 million. $4.2 million? 47 separate vendor payments, all flagged with various errors, all requiring immediate approval." Her voice was strained. They're using the auto-approval system to push through the entire batch without individual review. I felt the world tilt slightly. "Sienna, that's not embezzlement. That's a massive fraud operation." It gets worse. The payment authorization came with a directive signed by Griffin stating that any delays in processing would result in immediate personnel action against the responsible parties. He's threatening your job if you don't process fraudulent payments. And there's something else. One of the people on the conference call asked specifically about you, whether you still had any oversight authority, whether you'd been asking questions about vendor payments. My blood went cold. "What did you tell them?" "I said you'd been removed from oversight and had no access to current vendor systems. But Leo, they know you've been investigating." "How much do they know?" "I don't think they know about our meetings, but they definitely know someone's been asking questions about vendor payment irregularities." I stared into my untouched beer, my mind racing. Griffin and Carla weren't just stealing money, they were accelerating their timeline. The $4.2 million batch payment was probably their exit strategy, a final massive theft before disappearing. "Sienna, when are they demanding the payments be processed?" "Tomorrow morning, first thing. And if you refuse?" They made it very clear that refusal wasn't an option. I pulled out my phone and called Priya. "We're out of time. They're moving tomorrow morning, and it's bigger than we thought." "How much bigger?" $4.2 million bigger. There was a long pause. "Leo, at that level, we're talking about federal crimes with mandatory prison sentences. If Griffin and Carla are really planning to steal that much money, they'll disappear. New identities, offshore accounts, the whole thing. Which means we have less than 12 hours to stop them. Can we get a court order? An injunction?" "Not without more evidence than we have, and not without alerting them that we're coming." I looked at Sienna, who was watching me with desperate eyes. "Priya, what if we let them do it?" "What?" "What if we let them process the $4.2 million, but we document everything? If we can prove they stole that much money? They'll be in prison for the rest of their lives. But Leo, that's $4.2 million of company money. If Meridian goes under because of this, everyone loses their jobs anyway. Including your son?" I closed my eyes. Jonah was just starting his career. A scandal this big would destroy not just Griffin and Carla, but potentially the entire company. "Priya, what are our options?" "We can try to stop them before they process the payments. Confront them with the evidence, hope they confess or back down. And if they don't, then we watch them commit federal crimes and hope we can prove it afterward." I hung up and looked at Sienna. "I need you to do something for me, something that could cost you your job." "What?" "I need you to delay processing those payments, just for a few hours. Give me time to try to stop this." "Leo, they'll fire me. Or worse. If I can't stop them, they'll disappear with $4.2 million and you'll lose your job anyway when the company collapses." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass. "What do you need me to do?" "System maintenance, technical difficulties, vendor verification issues, anything that requires manual review and slows down the auto-approval process." "How long can you give me?" 6 hours, maybe 8 if you're creative. And if you can't stop them." I thought about Griffin's condescending smile, Carla's cold efficiency, and the 17 years of safeguards they'd destroyed for personal profit. "Then we make sure they go to prison for the rest of their lives." Sienna nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." As I left the restaurant, my phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "They know you're coming. Be ready." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and headed home to prepare for the most important confrontation of my career. In 12 hours, either Griffin and Carla would be in handcuffs, or I'd be looking for a new job, assuming I wasn't in handcuffs myself. The emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m. sharp. I arrived at Meridian Defense at 7:30, carrying a briefcase that contained 17 years of institutional knowledge and enough evidence to destroy 2 careers. The parking garage was unusually full for such an early hour. Board members' luxury cars mixed with the practical sedans of senior staff who'd been summoned to what Griffin had described as a critical operational review. Kat was already at her desk, her face pale and tense. "Leo, whatever you're planning, be careful. Griffin and Carla have been here since 6 a.m., and they're not acting like people who expect good news." "Where's the meeting?" "Executive conference room. Same place where—" She didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew what she meant. The same place where Griffin had called my work redundant and stripped away my authority. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked through the open office space, past my old cubicle with its cheap replacement chair, past the vendor oversight workstations that now sat largely empty. A few early employees looked up as I passed, their faces curious and worried. Word had spread that something big was happening. The executive conference room was already crowded when I arrived. Griffin sat at the head of the table, his expensive suit immaculate, his expression confident. Carla sat to his right, reviewing documents on her tablet with the same cold efficiency she'd shown when stripping my access. The board members were arrayed around the table like judges. Augustus Gus Brandt, the longtime non-executive director who'd always treated me with polite dismissal, Sarah Chen, the former military contractor who understood operational complexities, Michael Torres, the finance expert who asked uncomfortable questions about budget allocations. "Leo," Griffin said as I entered, "thank you for joining us. I know this is unusual, but we have some serious operational issues to discuss." I took a seat at the far end of the table, directly across from Griffin. "I'm sure we do." Priya entered behind me, her briefcase clicking against the polished floor. Several board members looked surprised. They hadn't expected legal counsel. "Priya will be representing me in this discussion," I said calmly. Griffin's confident expression flickered slightly. "I'm not sure that's necessary. This is just an operational review." "Then you won't mind if I have legal representation present." Gus Brandt cleared his throat. "Griffin, you called this emergency meeting. What's the situation?" Griffin stood up, moving to the presentation screen at the front of the room. "Over the past several weeks, we've discovered serious irregularities in our vendor payment processing, errors that have cost the company significant money and put our defense contracts at risk." A PowerPoint slide appeared showing a summary of vendor payment discrepancies. The numbers were staggering, over $300,000 in processing errors identified in the past month alone. "The source of these errors," Griffin continued, "appears to be outdated compliance protocols that failed to catch systematic vendor fraud. Protocols that were maintained by—" He looked directly at me. "Leo Morrow." I felt the weight of the board's attention shift to me. This was Griffin's play. Blame me for the vendor payment errors, make me the scapegoat for their fraud operation. "That's interesting," I said quietly, "because I was removed from vendor oversight 3 weeks ago." "Exactly," Carla spoke for the first time. "These errors occurred under your watch, before we implemented the new streamlined protocols." Priya opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "May I?" Gus nodded. "Please." Leo's compliance contract includes specific provisions regarding removal from oversight responsibilities. Priya stood up, moving to the presentation screen. Section 12.3 states that process changes implemented during the period of removal are subject to immediate review. Section 12.4 makes the executive who authorized the removal personally liable for any financial losses resulting from inadequate oversight. The room went very quiet. "Furthermore," Priya continued, "we have evidence that the vendor payment errors were not the result of inadequate oversight, but rather the systematic dismantling of oversight protocols specifically designed to prevent fraud." She nodded to me. I opened my briefcase and began distributing copies of our evidence to each board member. Vendor payment records showing systematic errors, security footage of after-hours document destruction, digital logs proving the deliberate elimination of safeguards. Griffin's face had gone pale. "This is ridiculous. Leo is a disgruntled employee making accusations based on documented evidence," I interrupted. "Evidence that shows you and Carla have been systematically defrauding this company for weeks." "That's a serious accusation," Sarah Chen said, studying the documents. "Do you have proof?" I looked at Priya, who nodded. "We have vendor payment records showing $186,200 in systematic errors processed through auto-approval protocols that Griffin implemented. We have security footage of Griffin and Carla destroying historical compliance documents. And we have digital logs proving they eliminated oversight safeguards specifically to hide their fraud operation." Michael Torres looked up from the financial records. "These payment discrepancies, they follow a clear pattern. $400 increments processed during off hours, approved without review." "Exactly," I said. And this morning, they attempted to process a batch payment of $4.2 million using the same fraudulent methods. The room erupted, board members talking over each other, demanding explanations, asking questions. Griffin tried to regain control, but his confident demeanor was cracking. "This is all circumstantial," he said desperately. "Process improvements, efficiency measures." "Jonah," I called toward the door. My son entered the room carrying a laptop. His face was nervous but determined. "I have the IT logs that prove the fraud operation." He connected his laptop to the presentation system. "These are the deleted system logs that show exactly how the vendor payment system was modified to allow unauthorized approvals." The screen filled with technical data, timestamps, user accounts, authorization codes. But the pattern was clear even to non-technical observers. Griffin and Carla had systematically dismantled every safeguard in the vendor payment system. "This hidden approval code," Jonah pointed to a highlighted section, "bypasses all oversight checks. It was embedded in the payment software by someone with administrative access." "Who has that level of access?" Gus asked. "The COO and the head of finance," Jonah replied, looking directly at Griffin and Carla. Carla finally spoke, her voice sharp with desperation. "This is all speculation. System modifications, process improvements, none of this proves criminal intent." "Actually, it does," Priya said. She pulled out another document. "Because we also have this." She handed copies to the board members. It was a recorded transcript of the conversation I'd overheard outside the server room. Griffin Voss. "The vendor payments are the perfect cover. We process the errors at the higher amounts, pocket the difference, and use the auto-approval system to cover our tracks." Carla Fenwick. "What about Morrow?" Griffin Voss. "Morrow's been neutralized. No access, no authority, no credibility." The silence in the room was deafening. Griffin stood up abruptly. "This is entrapment, illegal surveillance. None of this would be admissible." "In a criminal court, maybe," Gus interrupted. "But this is a corporate board meeting, and the evidence is overwhelming." Sarah Chen was studying the vendor payment records. "Leo, you said they attempted to process $4.2 million this morning." 47 separate fraudulent payments, all requiring immediate approval without review. I looked at Griffin and Carla. Sienna Liu from Blackwater Defense Contracting was threatened with termination if she didn't process the payments immediately. "Where are those payments now?" Michael Torres asked. "Delayed due to technical difficulties," I said. "But the authorization was signed by Griffin, with Carla's approval." Priya pulled out the final piece of evidence. "Which brings us to the personal liability clause in Leo's contract. Griffin, by removing Leo from oversight and implementing these fraudulent protocols, you've assumed personal responsibility for any financial losses." She looked around the room. "The total documented losses are $186,200 in processed fraudulent payments, plus $4.2 million in attempted fraud. Under the terms of Leo's contract, Griffin is personally liable for the full amount." Griffin's face was ashen. "You can't. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Gus said grimly, "because this board is voting to immediately terminate you for cause and refer this matter to federal prosecutors." "All in favor?" Every hand went up except Griffin's and Carla's. Motion carried. Gus looked toward the door. "Security?" Rami entered the room with 2 other security guards. "Mr. Voss, Ms. Fenwick, you're terminated effective immediately. Please surrender your company badges and access cards." Griffin tried one last desperate play. "You're making a mistake. Leo Morrow is a bitter old man who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. This whole thing is revenge." "Griffin," I said quietly, "the vendor payment system you called redundant? It caught $2.3 million in actual fraud attempts last year. The compliance protocols you eliminated, they were required by federal law for defense contractors. The oversight you said was outdated? It was the only thing standing between this company and criminal liability." I stood up, facing him across the table. "You called my work redundant, but the only thing redundant in this room is you?" Security escorted Griffin and Carla out as the board watched in silence. Through the conference room windows, I could see employees gathering in the main office, watching their former executives being led away in handcuffs. "Leo," Gus said after they were gone, "the board would like to offer you the position of interim COO while we search for permanent leadership." I looked around the room, at the board members who'd witnessed Griffin's downfall, at Priya who'd helped me build the legal case, at Jonah who'd risked his career to provide evidence. "I accept," I said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "We rebuild the compliance systems properly this time. No shortcuts, no streamlining, no efficiency measures that compromise oversight. Agreed. As the meeting broke up, I walked back to my old cubicle one last time. The cheap replacement chair was still there, a reminder of how quickly things could change. But on my desk, someone had placed my old coffee mug, the one with the hairline crack down the left side. There was a note attached. "Welcome back. Cat." I sat down in the uncomfortable chair and opened my laptop. 17 unread emails, including 3 from Sienna Liu with updates on the vendor payment situation. The work was already piling up, but for the first time in weeks, I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months later, Griffin Voss and Carla Fenwick were sentenced to federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. The total amount they'd stolen was $847,000 over a 3-month period. If their final $4.2 million attempt had succeeded, it would have bankrupted Meridian Defense and cost 300 people their jobs. Instead, the company recovered all stolen funds, implemented new oversight protocols, and landed the largest defense contract in its history. And in my new office, the one that used to be Griffin's, I keep a small plaque that Kat gave me as a joke. Redundant, add G. No longer needed or useful, superfluous. Sometimes the most important work is the work that nobody notices until it's gone.